My name is Elena Carter, and I am 32 years old. If you had told me years ago that I would be standing in my own bakery, watching my son dream of following in my footsteps, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I am, in the heart of Boston, running a bakery that I built with nothing but determination and a love for pastries. It was early morning, and the city outside was just beginning to wake up. A thin mist hung over the streets, the kind that made everything feel a little quieter, a little more magical. Inside my bakery, Sweet Haven, the scent of warm dough and sugar filled the air as I carefully rolled out the pastry for the day's croissants. Mom, I did it. I turned to see my 8-year-old son, Leo, standing proudly with a cupcake in his small hands, decorated with delicate swirls of frosting. His brown eyes sparkled with excitement. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, gently stroking his hair. Saturday mornings had become our special time together. My husband, Daniel, was already out for another early meeting. As the sales director at Westfield Enterprises, his job never really stopped, not even on weekends. I had accepted it long ago, but sometimes I wished we had more time as a family. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Elena, today's croissants are perfect." I looked up to see Mira, one of my best employees, peeking her head into the kitchen. "More than half are gone already." I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. Just a few weeks ago, we had been featured in the Boston Globe's Best Local Bakeries list. Since then, the lines outside our shop had only gotten longer. For someone like me, who grew up in Boston's low-income South End, raised by a single mother, this success felt surreal. I had spent years working my way up, earning a scholarship to a prestigious pastry school, training under top chefs, and finally, after years of saving and struggling, opening Sweet Haven. It wasn't just a business. It was proof that I had made something of myself. And yet, despite all my achievements, there was one person who never saw me as enough. That person was Margaret Westfield, my mother-in-law. She had never accepted me, not from the moment Daniel introduced me to his family. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a girl from the slums. She had made her feelings painfully clear, never missing an opportunity to belittle me, to remind me that I didn't belong. Even after Leo was born, she remained distant. While she doted on Daniel's nieces and nephews, showering them with gifts and affection, she treated my son like a stranger. The last time she heard him was at his 8th birthday party, just last month. She hadn't even bothered to show up, despite the invitation. And later, when Leo accidentally ran into her at a family gathering, she had looked at him with that same cold expression and said, "Expensive presents don't suit a child with a mother like yours." I had seen the way Leo's face fell. I had felt the way his little fingers curled into my dress, confused and hurt by the cruelty of his own grandmother. That was the moment I knew I would never forgive her. And yet, yesterday, an invitation had arrived. Margaret wanted us to attend the Westfield family's Thanksgiving dinner. Every year, this gathering was a grand affair, held at the Westfield Mansion in Chestnut Hill, attended by the city's elite. Every year, I dreaded it. And this time, more than ever, I wanted to refuse. "You don't have to go," Daniel had told me, concern in his voice. But then I had looked at Leo. "I want to get along with Grandma," he had said at the dinner table, his big, hopeful eyes shining. And how could I say no to that? "Let's go," I had decided. Now, as Thanksgiving morning arrived, I found myself baking an apple pie in my kitchen, not for Margaret's sake, but for my own. If I was going to walk into that house, I was going to do it with my head held high, carrying something I was proud of. Outside, the wind blew through the city, rustling the last of the autumn leaves. I had no idea that by the time the night was over, everything would change. Thanksgiving morning brought a biting cold wind, the kind that cut through even the thickest coat. As we drove through Chestnut Hill, the neighborhood stood out in its usual grandeur. Massive estates, towering maple trees with their last crimson leaves, and streets lined with luxury cars. It was a different world from the one I had grown up in. Leo sat in the back seat, nervously adjusting his light blue tie. His navy suit was brand new, picked out just for this occasion. A small silver pin sat on his breast pocket, something he had insisted on wearing to look fancy. "Mom, is my tie straight?" he asked, his little fingers fumbling with a knot. "Perfect," I reassured him, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His face held a mix of anticipation and unease, a reflection of what I was feeling myself. Beside me, Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. He was never tense, never rattled. But today was different. When we arrived at the Westfield mansion, it was just as intimidating as ever. The red-bricked Victorian home loomed in the distance, its elegant arched windows and massive oak doors standing as a symbol of old money and power. The circular driveway was already filled with luxury cars, Bentleys, Mercedes, a Rolls-Royce or two. A butler opened the door for us before we even had the chance to knock. The moment we stepped inside, the overwhelming warmth and scent of roasted turkey clashed with the chill we had carried in from outside. Inside, the hall was grand. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and laughter filled the air. Elegant guests in designer dresses and tailored suits sipped champagne, exchanging pleasantries in soft, polished tones. "Daniel, Elena, welcome." Daniel's father, Edward Westfield, approached us with a warm smile. He had always been different from his wife, mild-mannered, more concerned with keeping the family together than with maintaining social status. "And you, young man," he said, ruffling Leo's hair. "You're growing up fast." Leo beamed. It was one of the few moments that made coming here bearable. As Leo ran off to join his cousins, I allowed myself to breathe, just for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, this evening wouldn't be as bad as I expected. I was wrong, because then she arrived. A sharp click of heels on the marble staircase sent a wave of silence through the hall. Margaret Westfield descended the grand staircase, draped in an emerald green dress, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat. Her smile was practiced, her presence commanding. "Elena," she said smoothly, her gaze flicking over me, landing on my blouse. "What a lovely outfit." It was a backhanded compliment. I knew that tone all too well. I simply nodded, refusing to engage. Behind her, the household staff hovered near the dining area, their movements just a fraction slower, as if waiting for something. We were ushered to our seats at the massive mahogany dining table, which stretched nearly the length of the room. 20 place settings, fine china, antique silverware, everything arranged to perfection.
Leo's seat was beside mine.
But as we approached, my heart suddenly stopped. Because instead of a silver plate, in front of Leo's seat sat a stainless steel dog bowl. The word, puppy, was engraved along the edge. For a moment, the world went silent. I could hear the sharp gasp of a distant relative. Someone shifted uncomfortably. A maid, carrying a tray of wine glasses, nearly stumbled. Leo froze. His small fingers tightened around my sleeve as he stared at the bowl in front of him. My blood ran cold. What is the meaning of this? Daniel's voice was deadly quiet, but filled with barely controlled rage. And then, Margaret raised her champagne glass. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said lightly. "It's just a little joke. After all, why should a child raised by gutter blood expect fine dining?" A thin, cruel smile played on her lips. Leo's little chest rose and fell rapidly, his fingers trembling as he clutched my sleeve. But he didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, his small face struggling to process what was happening. And then, slowly, painfully slowly, he looked up at me. "Mom, do I have to eat from that?" I knelt beside him, my throat tight.
"No, sweetheart."
"Never." I reached for the bowl, ready to throw it across the room. But before I could, Leo, voice shaking, said, "I won't eat from it." And in that moment, Margaret's face darkened. "Excuse me?" Then it happened. Before anyone could react, before I could even process what was happening, Margaret's hand flew across Leo's small face. The crack of the slap echoed through the room. Leo stumbled backward, his little hand flying up to his burning cheek. His eyes were wide with shock, his small chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. Someone let out a gasp. A wine glass slipped from a guest's hand, shattering against the marble floor. My heart stopped. A silence heavier than anything I had ever felt swallowed the room. And then I moved. I reached for Leo, pulling him into my arms, shielding his trembling body. Daniel stood so fast that his chair scraped violently against the floor. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. Margaret took a slow sip of her wine, unbothered. Perhaps now he'll learn his place. Something inside me snapped. I stood, gripping my son tighter, my voice like steel. You will never touch my child again. Then I turned to Daniel, voice shaking with fury. We are leaving. Daniel didn't hesitate. He reached for my hand, his grip strong. Together, with Leo still shaking in my arms, we turned our backs on them. Behind us, the room erupted into chaos. Whispers, murmurs, gasps of disbelief. I didn't look back. Not when I reached the front door. Not when we stepped into the cold night air. Not even when I heard Margaret laughing behind me. That night, as Leo clung to me, crying himself to sleep, I knew one thing for certain. Margaret Westfield would pay for what she had done. The drive home was silent except for the steady hum of the engine. Leo sat curled up in the back seat, his small arms wrapped around himself, his cheeks still red from the slap. Every few minutes, he would sniff quietly, trying his best to hold back tears. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He hadn't spoken a word since we left the mansion, but I could feel the storm brewing inside him. I, too, was shaking, not just from anger but from something deeper. A cold, unrelenting rage. I had endured Margaret's cruelty for years. I had tolerated her insults, her condescension, her constant belittling. I had swallowed my pride time and time again for the sake of keeping peace.
But tonight?
Tonight, she hit my child. That was the moment I realized I would never forgive her. When we got home, I helped Leo out of his suit, gently wiping his face with a warm cloth. His little shoulders trembled under my touch. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered suddenly. My heart twisted painfully. You have nothing to be sorry for, I said, pulling him into my arms. You did nothing wrong. Leo buried his face into my chest. And then, after holding it in all night, he finally broke down. Tears spilled from his big brown eyes as he sobbed, his little body shaking. I just wanted Grandma to like me, he choked out. I just wanted her to be nice. I rubbed his back, my own throat tight. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some people are just cruel? That no matter how kind you are, no matter how much you want to be loved, some people will never change? I couldn't. So I just held him. As I sat beside his bed, reading his favorite bedtime story, he finally drifted off to sleep. But even in sleep, his small hands clutched my sleeve, as if afraid I would leave. When I stepped out of his room, I found Daniel in the living room. He was standing by the window, staring out into the dark night, his phone in his hand. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, documents, contracts, reports from Westfield Enterprises. For the first time in my life, I saw something in Daniel I had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered rage. I will never forgive her, he said, his voice low and dangerous. His hand was shaking as he gripped his phone. Then, before I could say anything, he dialed a number. I didn't stop him. This confrontation was inevitable. The phone rang once.
Twice.
Then Margaret answered. Daniel, how dare you storm out like that? You embarrass me in front of. You hit my son. Daniel cut her off, his voice like steel. You humiliated him. You abused an 8-year-old child in front of our entire family. There was a pause. Then Margaret scoffed. Oh, don't be ridiculous.
It was just a slap.
He needed to be taught some respect. Daniel's hand clenched into a fist. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice deadly calm. This ends today. You're no longer part of my family. And as of tomorrow, I am resigning from Westfield Enterprises. A sharp inhale. You wouldn't dare, Margaret hissed. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Watch me. And then he hung up. It had begun. The next morning, news spread like wildfire. Daniel Westfield had resigned from the family business. More than that, his most trusted employees followed him. The sales department, the backbone of the company, began to collapse overnight. Clients started pulling out of deals. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Westfield Enterprises, a company that had stood for decades, was suddenly crumbling. But it wasn't over, because I had one more move to make. The morning after Daniel resigned, I sat in our living room, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. Leo was still asleep, exhausted from the events of the previous night. Daniel was in his office, making calls, setting up meetings, preparing to build something new, away from his mother's control. But I had my own plan. I picked up my phone and took a deep breath before dialing. Boston Child Protective Services, how can I help you? My grip on the phone tightened. I want to report a case of child abuse, I said, my voice steady. And just like that, Margaret Westfield's downfall truly began. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I arrived at the police station, where I gave my full statement. I detailed everything. The way Margaret had humiliated Leo, the way she had slapped him in front of an entire room of people, the years of verbal and emotional abuse. The officers listened carefully, taking notes. When I was finished, the detective in charge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, do you have any witnesses? I nodded. An entire room full of them. A few phone calls later, the police had everything they needed. Guests from the Thanksgiving dinner confirmed the incident. Even some of Margaret's own relatives, ones who had always stayed silent, finally spoke up. Margaret's influence had protected her for years. But this time, it wasn't enough. That evening, while Margaret sat in her lavish mansion, sipping wine as if nothing had happened, the police arrived at her door. She didn't see it coming. When she answered, dressed in her usual perfection, the officers didn't hesitate. Margaret Westfield, you are under arrest for child abuse. A gasp escaped her lips. What? This is ridiculous. But as the officers read her rights, as the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars reflected in her grand windows, reality began to sink in. The press caught wind of it immediately. Within hours, headlines spread across Boston. Prominent businesswoman arrested for child abuse. For the first time in her life, Margaret Westfield was powerless. The next few weeks were chaos. Westfield Enterprises, already struggling from Daniel's resignation, collapsed further under the weight of the scandal. Stock prices plummeted. Clients terminated their contracts. Investors withdrew funding. Margaret's past financial crimes came to light. It turned out her lavish lifestyle had been funded by the company's money. Private jets, designer renovations, luxury vacations, all charged to the business. The SEC launched a full investigation. By the time Margaret's trial date was set, Westfield Enterprises was on the verge of bankruptcy. She had lost everything. Margaret sat in the courtroom, her once flawless posture slightly hunched, her designer suit looking out of place among the dull walls of the courthouse. She still held on to her arrogance until she saw us enter. I walked in, holding Leo's hand, his grip firm in mine. Daniel walked beside us, his face unreadable. Margaret's eyes flickered, maybe with regret, maybe with fear. The trial didn't last long. The evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified. Doctors confirmed that Leo had bruising on his cheek from the slap. The judge, unimpressed with Margaret's attempts to manipulate the situation, passed the sentence swiftly. Margaret Westfield, you are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for child abuse, financial fraud, and corruption. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Margaret went pale. Her hands gripped the table as if trying to hold on to the last shred of control. But there was nothing left. She was escorted out in handcuffs. And just like that, justice was served. 1 month later, everything had changed. Daniel's new company, Carter and Westfield Associates, was thriving. Top talent from his former company had joined him. Clients followed, and investors trusted his leadership. Westfield Enterprises, once a powerhouse, had collapsed. Margaret, once the queen of Boston's elite, was now a forgotten figure, a disgraced woman spending her days in a prison cell. And us? We were finally free. Leo was happy again. His smile had returned. His laughter filled our home once more. One morning, as we sat in our bakery, enjoying the warmth and the scent of fresh pastries, Leo looked up at me and said, "Mom, your bakery is the best. Can I help bake today?" I smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's do it together." And so we did. As the winter sun shone through the bakery windows, as customers lined up outside for our famous croissants, I realized something. This was our happy ending. And nothing, not power, not money, not even the ghosts of the past, could take it away from us. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, make sure to like the video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more engaging stories to life. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you in the next video.